The scream that tore from Sarah McKenna's throat when the wagon wheel rolled over both her hands would haunt the prairie for years to come, though no one but the horses heard it that blazing afternoon in June of 1877. She had been trying to fix the damn wheel herself, lying beneath the wagon in the dirt of her small Montana farm, when the jack slipped and 2,000 pounds of wood and iron came crashing down on her outstretched fingers. The pain was white-hot and absolute, stealing her breath and turning her vision into a kaleidoscope of stars. When she finally managed to drag herself free, both hands were already swelling, the fingers bent at angles that made her stomach heave. She knew immediately they were broken, multiple fractures from the feel of it, and she was alone on 160 acres with no neighbor for 5 miles, and cattle that needed tending, and chickens that needed feeding, and a whole damn farm that would not run itself. She made it to the porch before her legs gave out, collapsing against the weathered wood with tears streaming down her dusty cheeks. Not from the pain, though that was considerable, but from the sheer impossibility of her situation. Her husband had been dead 8 months now, kicked in the head by a stallion he had been trying to break, and she had promised herself she would make this work. She had survived the winter alone, learned to shoot, learned to manage the livestock, learned to swallow her pride and her grief, and keep moving forward because stopping meant losing everything. But this was different. A person could not run a farm without hands. A person could not even dress themselves or eat or drink water without hands. The sun beat down mercilessly as she sat there trying to think through the fog of pain, trying to figure out what the hell she was supposed to do now. That was when she heard the hoofbeats. Sarah's first instinct was fear. A woman alone was vulnerable enough without being injured, and there were plenty of men in Montana Territory who would see her situation as an opportunity rather than a crisis requiring assistance. She tried to stand, thinking she might make it inside to the rifle, but her legs were still shaking and her hands, when she tried to brace herself against the porch rail, simply would not cooperate. The pain that shot up her arms when her broken fingers made contact with the wood nearly made her pass out. So she stayed where she was, watching as a lone rider crested the small rise that separated her property from the main trail, leading a pack horse behind him. He was tall in the saddle, she could see that much, wearing a dusty brown hat and a dark shirt that had probably been black before the trail wore it gray. He rode like a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than on his own 2 feet, easy and comfortable, and when he caught sight of her sitting on the porch, he changed direction immediately, urging his horse into a faster walk. Sarah felt her heart hammering as he approached, trying to assess the threat level. His gun belt was visible, but his hands were nowhere near his weapon. His posture suggested concern rather than aggression. She still did not relax. "Ma'am," his voice carried across the yard before he had even reached the fence. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question, but settled for shaking her head. "No," she called back, her voice hoarse from screaming. "No, I am not." He dismounted before he reached the house, moving with a quick efficiency that spoke of genuine worry. Up close she could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably no more than 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly where it touched his collar, and eyes that were an unusual shade of blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains. His face was tanned and weathered, but handsome in a rough-hewn way, all strong jaw and straight nose, and a mouth that looked like it smiled easily, though it was not smiling now. Now it was drawn tight with concern as he took in her position on the porch, the way she was cradling her hands against her chest, the tear tracks on her face. "Jesus," he breathed, and then seemed to catch himself. "Pardon my language, ma'am. What happened?" "Wagon wheel," Sarah managed, holding up her hands slightly so he could see the damage. Even that small movement made her gasp. "The jacks slipped. They are broken. Both of them." The cowboy's expression shifted from concern to something harder, more determined. "All right," he said, his voice steady and calm in a way that made her want to weep with relief. "All right, we are going to get you fixed up. My name is James Cordell, ma'am, and I have some experience with field medicine. May I take a look?" Sarah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She did not have much choice, and there was something about him that felt trustworthy, something in the directness of his gaze and the gentleness of his movements as he climbed the porch steps. He knelt in front of her, removing his hat and setting it aside, then reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to. When she did not, he took her left hand first, supporting it carefully while he examined the damage. His touch was remarkably gentle for a man with such rough, calloused hands. He did not prod or poke, just looked, his eyes moving over the swelling and the misaligned fingers with a practiced assessment. "Multiple fractures," he said after a moment. "Looks like at least 3 fingers broken on this hand, probably the metacarpals too. May I see the other one?" Sarah extended her right hand, biting her lip hard enough to taste blood as he repeated the examination. This one was worse. She knew it from the way it throbbed, and his expression confirmed it. "This one is more severe," he said quietly. "The thumb is definitely broken, and possibly some of the bones in your palm. Ma'am, I can splint these and bind them, but you need a proper doctor. Where is the nearest town?" "Willow Creek," Sarah said. 12 miles east. But I cannot leave. I have livestock. I have responsibilities." James Cordell looked at her like she had lost her mind, which perhaps she had. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you cannot run a farm with 2 broken hands. You need medical attention." "I need my farm," Sarah shot back, her voice rising despite herself. "This is all I have left. My husband is dead, Mr. Cordell. I have no family, no money beyond what this land produces. If I leave, if I let it fall apart even for a few days, I lose everything. I cannot afford to lose everything." Something in his expression softened at that, understanding mixing with the concern. He was quiet for a long moment, thinking, then nodded once as if coming to a decision. "Then I will stay," he said simply. "I will bandage your hands properly, and I will stay and help you run the farm until you heal enough to manage on your own. You will not lose your land, ma'am, not if I can help it." Sarah stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You cannot be serious." "I am entirely serious." He stood, moving toward his horse. "I have no pressing engagements, and I cannot in good conscience ride away and leave an injured woman alone on a farm she cannot manage. Now, I have medical supplies in my saddlebag. Let me get them, and we will start by getting those hands properly bound. Then you can tell me what needs doing around here." She watched in amazement as he retrieved a worn leather bag from his pack horse, along with a canteen of water. This made no sense. Men did not just stop their lives to help strange women for no reason. There had to be an angle, a catch, something he wanted in return. "Mr. Cordell," she said as he returned to the porch, "I cannot pay you. I have almost nothing. I am not asking for payment." He set the bag down and pulled out clean cloth strips and a small bottle of what looked like whiskey. "I am offering help because you need it, and I am able to give it. Nothing more complicated than that, though I would appreciate knowing your name, seeing as I will be staying a while." "Sarah," she said faintly. "Sarah McKenna. Mrs. McKenna." He nodded respectfully. "Now, I am not going to lie to you. This is going to hurt quite a bit. I need to straighten some of these fingers before I can splint them properly, and there is no way to do that without causing you pain. But it has to be done, or they will heal crooked and you will never have full use of your hands again. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, her mouth dry. She had worked through pain before, had dealt with injuries and illness and the 100 small agonies of farm life, but there was something terrifying about the deliberate infliction of pain, even necessary pain. James seemed to sense her fear because he met her eyes directly, his own gaze steady and reassuring. "I will be as quick and as careful as I can," he promised, "and I will not do anything without telling you first. You have my word on that." "All right," Sarah whispered. "All right, do it." The next half hour was a special kind of hell. James worked with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, explaining each step before he did it, but explanation did nothing to mitigate the agony of having broken bones shifted back into alignment. Sarah bit down on a leather strap he offered her, her whole body rigid with the effort of not jerking away, while he methodically straightened each finger, secured it with a thin wooden splint, and wrapped it carefully. The whiskey he poured over the worst of the scrapes and cuts burned like liquid fire, and by the time he finished with the first hand, she was shaking uncontrollably. "You are doing fine," James said quietly, and there was something in his voice, some warmth and approval, that helped more than she would have expected. "Just one more to go. You are tougher than most men I know, Mrs. McKenna." She wanted to tell him not to patronize her, but the truth was his words helped, gave her something to hold on to as he started on the right hand, which was indeed worse than the left. The thumb required the most work, and she actually cried out when he manipulated it back into position, the sound muffled by the leather strap. But then it was done. both hands wrapped in clean white bandages with wooden splints keeping everything immobile, and James was offering her water from his canteen, holding it to her lips so she could drink because she certainly could not hold it herself. "Thank you," she managed when she had caught her breath. The pain was still considerable, but already beginning to settle into something more manageable, less acute. "Thank you, Mr. Cordell." "James," he corrected gently. "If I am going to be staying here, we may as well use first names. Now, why do you not tell me what needs doing around this place, and I will get started. Have you eaten today?" Sarah realized with a start that she had not. It had been early morning when the accident happened, and the sun was now well past its zenith, probably 3 or 4 in the afternoon. "No," she admitted, "but I cannot cook like this." "Then I will cook," James said matter-of-factly. "After I see to whatever is most urgent with the livestock. You have cattle? I saw them in the north pasture. Anything else?" "Chickens," Sarah said, still trying to wrap her mind around the fact that this was actually happening. "A milk cow, 2 pigs. The chickens need feeding, and the cow needs milking. She is probably uncomfortable by now. And the cattle need to be checked. They have access to the creek, but I usually ride out in the evening to make sure none have gotten stuck in the mud or tangled in brush." James nodded, taking it all in. "I will handle it. You stay here and rest. Is there a barn?" "Behind the house." Sarah gestured vaguely with one bandaged hand. "The feed is in there, and the milking stool." "James, are you sure about this? This is a lot to take on." He smiled then, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his whole face, made him look younger, and somehow both more handsome and more approachable. "I grew up on a ranch, Mrs. McKenna. Sarah, this is familiar work. I will be fine. You just rest and try not to move those hands more than necessary. They need time to start healing." He settled his hat back on his head and headed for the barn, leaving Sarah sitting on the porch in a state of bewildered gratitude. She listened to the sounds of him moving around her property, the creak of the barn door, the soft clucking of chickens being fed, the patient lowing of the cow. Part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to demand something or reveal some ulterior motive, but he just worked, steady and efficient, doing exactly what he had said he would do. An hour later, he returned to the house with a pail of fresh milk and a report. "Cow is fine now, chickens are fed, pigs are happy. I will ride out to check the cattle in a bit, but first I am going to make us both some supper. Where is your kitchen?" Sarah directed him inside, feeling strange about having a man she barely knew moving through her house. But he was respectful, keeping his presence as unobtrusive as possible while he investigated her supplies. She heard him rattling around, heard the stove being lit, and 20 minutes later, he emerged with 2 plates of fried salt, pork, beans, and cornbread that smelled like heaven. He had to feed her, holding the fork and lifting it to her mouth, and Sarah felt her face burn with embarrassment at the intimacy of it. But James acted like it was the most natural thing in the world, patient and unflappable. "You are good at this," she said between bites. "The cooking, I mean, and the rest of it." "My mother insisted all her children learn to cook," James said. "Said a person who could not feed themselves was helpless, and she did not raise helpless children. I had 3 sisters too, so I learned early that there was no such thing as women's work and men's work, just work that needed doing." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman," Sarah said softly. "She was." Something flickered across his face, old pain quickly masked. "She passed 5 years ago. Fever took her and my youngest sister both. My father followed a year later. I think his heart just gave out from missing her." "I am sorry," Sarah said, and meant it. She knew the weight of that kind of loss, the way it never quite left you. "My husband died last October. Horse kicked him. He was dead before he hit the ground. Some days I am glad it was quick, that he did not suffer. Other days I am so angry at him for leaving me that I can barely breathe." James nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Grief is complicated," he said. "My sisters tried to tell me I should be grateful my parents did not linger in pain, but gratitude does not make you miss them less. Where are your people, Sarah? Do you have family?" "Not anymore," she said. "My parents died when I was 16, cholera. My brother brought me west when he decided to try mining in California, but he died in a cave-in before we made it that far. I met Thomas, my husband, in Wyoming. We married and came here to file a homestead claim. This was going to be our fresh start, our future." She looked out at the land visible from the porch, the the rolling grass and distant mountains. Now it is just mine, and I am trying so hard to hold on to it, but everything keeps going wrong. Not everything, James said quietly. I showed up, did I not? At exactly the right time. Maybe that is something going right. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the kindness in his face and the steadiness of his presence. Maybe it is, she admitted, though I still do not understand why you were doing this. Because it is the right thing to do, James said simply. And because I know what it is like to feel like you are drowning and need someone to throw you a rope. After my father died, I was lost for a long time. I sold the ranch, could not bear to stay there with all the memories, and I have been drifting ever since, working odd jobs, moving from place to place, looking for something I could not name. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is what I needed, to be useful again, to help someone who needs helping. There was a rawness to his honesty that made Sarah's throat tight. Well, she said, trying to keep her voice light, you have certainly come to the right place if you want to be useful. This farm has about 1,000 things that need doing on any given day. James grinned. Then I better get started. Let me clean up these dishes and then I will ride out to check those cattle before the light fails. You should probably try to sleep if you can. Your body needs rest to heal. He was right, though Sarah felt guilty about sleeping while he worked. Still, the pain and the shock of the injury had exhausted her more than she wanted to admit. And after James helped her inside and settled her on her bed, boots removed but still fully clothed because she could not manage buttons or laces with her bandaged hands, she found herself drifting off almost immediately. The last thing she heard was the sound of his horse heading out toward the pastures, steady and reassuring. She woke in full darkness to the sound of someone moving quietly in the house. For a moment, panic seized her. Then she remembered. James. It was just James. She called out softly and heard his footsteps approaching her bedroom door, which he had left open, probably so he could hear if she needed anything. I am here, he said from the doorway, a darker shadow against the darkness of the hall. Did not mean to wake you. Cattle are fine, by the way. I found one with a cut on her leg, cleaned it, and wrapped it. She should be all right. Thank you, Sarah said. James, where are you sleeping? I put my bedroll in the barn, he said. Figured that was most appropriate. That is ridiculous, Sarah said before she could think better of it. It gets cold at night, even in summer, and the barn is drafty. There is a spare room, my husband's office. It has a cot. You should use it. There was a long pause. Are you sure? I do not want you to be uncomfortable. I am uncomfortable either way, Sarah said honestly. At least this way you will be warm, and I will not feel guilty. Please, James, you are doing so much for me. The least I can offer is a proper place to sleep. All right, he said finally. Thank you, Sarah. Do you need anything before I turn in? Water, food, help with anything? No, she said, then reconsidered. Actually, yes. I hate to ask, but I should probably use the outhouse before I sleep, and I'm not sure I can manage the door latches on my own. Of course, James said immediately, no embarrassment or hesitation in his voice. Let me help you up. It was humbling and humiliating in equal measure, needing assistance with such basic things, but James made it as dignified as possible, helping her outside and waiting at a discreet distance, then helping her back to bed. He brought her water in a cup with a straw he had fashioned from a hollow piece of reed, which she thought was incredibly clever, and made sure she could reach him if she needed anything in the night. Then he retreated to the spare room, and Sarah lay in the darkness listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person in her house, trying to decide how she felt about it. Mostly, she realized, she felt grateful and safe. For the first time since Thomas died, she did not feel quite so alone. The next morning, James woke her at dawn with coffee and scrambled eggs, which he once again had to help her eat, and a plan for the day. I am going to need you to tell me everything about how this place runs, he said. What your normal routine is, what tasks need doing daily, weekly, monthly, what your planning situation is, what your goals are for the year, everything. That way I can make sure nothing important gets missed. So Sarah talked, and James listened, occasionally asking clarifying questions. And by the time breakfast was finished, he had a clear picture of the scope of work involved in keeping the McKenna farm running. It was substantial. Sarah had 40 acres under cultivation, planted mostly with hay and oats, both of which would need harvesting in another month. She had 30 head of cattle, a mix of cows and calves that she was raising to sell in the fall. The chickens provided eggs, which she traded in town for supplies. The pigs would be slaughtered in the autumn. The milk cow provided dairy for her own use and occasional trading. There were fences to maintain, equipment to repair, a garden to tend, and about 100 other small tasks that added up to long, exhausting days of constant work. "You have been managing all this alone?" James asked, sounding genuinely impressed. "Since October?" "I had some help early on," Sarah admitted. "Neighbors came by after Thomas died, helped me get through the first month. But people have their own concerns, their own work. I could not expect them to keep coming, so I learned. I made mistakes, a lot of them, but I learned." "You should be proud of yourself," James said seriously. "This is not easy work, not for anyone, and especially not for someone managing it alone. You have done well, Sarah." The praise made her uncomfortable in a way she could not quite name, so she changed the subject. "What about you? What were you doing before you showed up here? Just drifting, you said?" "More or less," James agreed. He was at her sink washing the breakfast dishes, his back to her, and there was something companionable about talking while he worked, like they were old friends instead of strangers. "I have been working cattle drives mostly, hiring on for the spring and summer, then wintering in various towns doing odd jobs. Last drive ended in Miles City a week ago, and I was heading south with no particular destination in mind, just following the weather and seeing where the road took me." "And it took you here," Sarah said, "to a broken-down farm with a broken-down farmer." James turned to look at her, his expression serious. "You are not broken down," he said firmly. "You are injured, which is different. Injury heals. And this farm is not broken down either. It just needs someone to help keep it running for a while. Both of those are temporary problems with temporary solutions." Sarah wanted to believe him, but doubt was a hard habit to break. "What if my hands do not heal properly? What if I cannot work the way I used to?" "Then you adapt," James said simply. "People are remarkably good at adapting when they have to be. But let us not borrow trouble from the future. Right now, today, your job is to rest and let yourself heal. My job is to keep this place running. So, why do you not tell me what is most urgent today, and I will get to it?" The most urgent task, Sarah explained, was checking the irrigation ditches for the hay fields. It had not rained in over a week, and the crops needed water, which meant making sure the ditches that diverted water from the creek were clear of debris and flowing properly. James nodded, made note of where the ditches were, and headed out with a shovel and rake. Sarah spent the morning on the porch with a book she could not turn the pages of, feeling useless and frustrated. But when James returned at midday, he reported that the ditches were clear and the fields were getting good water flow. "You have that set up well," he told her over lunch, which was leftover cornbread and cold milk. "Good engineering. Did your husband design the system?" "I did," Sarah said with a flash of pride. "Thomas was good with animals, but he did not have much head for that kind of planning. I grew up near farmland, watched how the big operations managed their water. I just copied what I saw." James looked at her with newfound respect. "You are full of surprises, Sarah McKenna." "I am full of something," she muttered, and he laughed, the sound bright and easy in the quiet house. They fell into a routine over the next few days, and Sarah was continually amazed by how competent James was at everything he turned his hand to. He had not been exaggerating about growing up on a ranch. He could rope cattle, mend fences, repair equipment, and handle a dozen other tasks with the ease of long practice. More than that, he seemed to genuinely enjoy the work, which Sarah found both puzzling and endearing. Most men she knew viewed farm work as a necessary burden, something to be endured. James approached it with a kind of cheerful focus, taking satisfaction in a job well done. He was also remarkably patient with her frustration. Sarah had always been independent, had always prided herself on her capability, and being helpless was eating her alive. She could not dress herself properly, could not brush her own hair, could not write or sew, or do any of the dozen small tasks that filled a day. Everything required assistance, and while James never complained, never made her feel like a burden, she felt like one anyway. On the third day, she snapped at him over something trivial, taking out her frustration in a way that was completely unfair, and braced herself for anger in return. Instead, James just looked at her steadily and said, "You have a right to be angry. This situation is terrible and frustrating, and you did nothing to deserve it. So, go ahead and be angry. Yell if you need to. I can take it." His understanding somehow made it worse, made the tears come hot and fast, and Sarah found herself crying in earnest for the first time since the accident, sobbing out her fear and anger and helplessness while James sat quietly nearby, not trying to fix it or shush her, just bearing witness. When she finally cried herself out, he brought her water and a cool cloth for her face, and they did not speak of it again, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had come down. That night after supper, James asked if she would like him to read to her. He had noticed the book she had been unable to manage, a novel she had been in the middle of when the accident happened, and offered to pick up where she had left off. Sarah agreed, expecting him to be a halting, self-conscious reader, but instead he read with expression and skill, bringing the characters to life in a way that made her forget for a little while that she was a broken woman trapped in a prison of her own body. They made it through 3 chapters before her eyelids grew heavy, and James marked the page and bid her goodnight. And Sarah realized as she drifted off to sleep that she had not felt this content in months. A week into his stay, they had a visitor. Sarah was on the porch mending, or rather watching James mend a bridle while she directed him, when a wagon came up the road. She recognized the driver immediately, Marcus Tully, owner of the largest spread in the area, and a man who had been making increasingly persistent offers to buy her land since Thomas died. He was in his mid-40s, prosperous and self-important, and he looked distinctly surprised to see a strange man sitting on Sarah's porch. "Mrs. McKenna," he called as he climbed down from the wagon, "I heard you had an accident. Came to see if you needed help." His eyes were on James, assessing and not particularly friendly. "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Tully," Sarah said, keeping her voice polite but cool. "As you can see, I am managing. This is James Cordell. He has been kind enough to assist with the farm work while I recover." "Has he now?" Tully's gaze raked over James, taking in the worn clothes and the easy competence evident in how he handled the leather he was working. "Did not realize you had family in the area, Mrs. McKenna." "I do not," Sarah said. "Mr. Cordell is a good Samaritan who happened by at the right time. I have been very fortunate." Tully's expression suggested he thought her foolish rather than fortunate. "Mrs. McKenna, might I have a word with you, in private?" Sarah did not particularly want to speak with him, but refusing would be rude and potentially problematic. Tully was influential in the area, and she could not afford to make an enemy of him. "Of course," she said. "James, would you excuse us?" James looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded and stood, taking the bridle with him as he walked toward the barn, though Sarah noticed he did not go inside, just lingered in the shadow of the building, where he could see if anything went wrong. The observation made her feel safer than she wanted to examine too closely. Tully waited until James was out of earshot, then leaned against the porch rail, his posture casual, but his eyes sharp. "Mrs. McKenna, I am going to speak plainly. You are in no condition to run this farm, and having a strange man living here with you, no matter how temporary, is going to cause talk. People will assume things. Your reputation will suffer." "My reputation is my concern," Sarah said stiffly, "and I hardly think people will assume anything untoward about a man helping an injured neighbor." "You are naive if you believe that," Tully said bluntly. "Regardless, this seems like an opportune time to renew my offer to purchase your property. I will give you a fair price, enough to set you up in town comfortably. You could live as a respectable widow, maybe find work as a seamstress or a teacher. This is no life for a woman alone, Mrs. McKenna. Surely you must see that." "What I see," Sarah said, her temper rising, "is a man who thinks I am helpless and stupid. I am neither. Mr. Tully, I have no intention of selling my land, not to you or anyone else. This farm is my home and my livelihood, and I will not give it up because I had an accident." Tully's mouth tightened. "You are being foolish, and trusting a stranger like this, letting him live in your house, that is foolish too. You know nothing about this man. He could be anyone. Criminal, drifter, con artist. He could rob you blind or worse, and who would stop him?" "I trust him," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with the vehemence of her conviction. "He has had ample opportunity to rob me or harm me, and instead he has done nothing but help. My answer is no, Mr. Tully. It was no the last 5 times you asked, and it remains no now. Please respect that." For a moment she thought he might argue further, might push, but then he straightened and put his hat back on, his expression shuddering. "Very well, Mrs. McKenna. But when this ends badly, and it will, do not say I did not warn you. Good day." He climbed back into his wagon and drove off, and Sarah let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. James emerged from the barn, his face concerned. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Sarah said. "He is just a busybody who thinks he knows what is best for everyone. Ignore him." But James was frowning, looking after the departing wagon. "He is right about one thing," he said slowly. "Me being here, living in your house, it probably will cause talk. I did not think about that. I should have. I am sorry, Sarah. If I am making things harder for you—" "You are not," Sarah interrupted. "You are making things possible, which is completely different. Let people talk if they want to talk. I do not care." "You should care," James said seriously. "Reputation matters, especially for a woman in your position. If people start thinking that there is something improper happening here, it could hurt you. Make it harder to do business in town, harder to get help if you need it. I will not be responsible for damaging your standing in the community." Sarah felt a spike of panic at the thought of him leaving. "So, what do you suggest? That you go? That I try to manage alone with two broken hands?" "No," James said, still frowning. "No, you cannot manage alone, not yet. But maybe we need to be more careful. Make sure we are beyond reproach. I will sleep in the barn from now on. Make it clear to anyone who visits that we are not, that nothing inappropriate is happening. James, you do not have to—" "Yes, I do," he said firmly. "Your reputation is more important than my comfort. I will not have people thinking poorly of you because of me." There was something both frustrating and touching about his protectiveness, about the fact that he cared enough about her welfare to worry about such things. "All right," Sarah said finally, "if you think it is necessary. But I want it noted that I think Marcus Tully is a meddling old goat, and his opinion means nothing to me." James smiled at that, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "Noted," he said. "Now, I believe we have a fence in the east pasture that needs mending, and those chickens are not going to feed themselves. Shall I get back to work?" "Please," Sarah said, and watched him walk away, trying not to think too hard about why the thought of him leaving, even just to sleep in the barn, made her chest feel tight. The days continued to pass, marked by the steady rhythm of farm work and the slow, frustrating process of healing. Sarah's hands hurt less as time went on, the acute pain fading to a dull ache, but they remained swollen and useless, the bandages needing to be changed regularly. James handled that task with the same gentle efficiency he brought to everything else, carefully unwrapping the soiled bandages, checking for signs of infection or improper healing, then rewrapping everything cleanly. His hands were always warm and steady, and Sarah found herself looking forward to those moments in a way that probably was not entirely appropriate. She was becoming attached to him, she realized with some alarm. Not just grateful, which would have been natural and expected, but genuinely attached. She liked the sound of his voice, liked the way he hummed while he worked, liked the crinkles that appeared at the corners of his eyes when he smiled. She liked his competence and his kindness and the way he treated her as an equal, even when she was at her most helpless. She liked having him around, liked the feeling of not being alone, and that was dangerous because James had never promised to stay beyond her recovery. He had a life somewhere else, plans and dreams that did not include a struggling farm in Montana territory, and it would be foolish to start imagining otherwise. But her heart, it seemed, was not particularly interested in being sensible. 2 weeks after the accident, Sarah was in the kitchen attempting to peel potatoes, an exercise in futility that left her near tears with frustration, when James came in from the fields covered in dust and looking troubled. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "I rode the property line today like you asked, and I found something concerning." Sarah set down the potato she had been mangling. "What is it?" "Someone has been cutting your fence," James said grimly. "Deliberately. I found 3 spots where the wire has been snipped clean through, and cattle tracks leading off toward Tully's property. I do not think this is accidental, Sarah." Sarah felt cold despite the warmth of the kitchen. "You think Tully is stealing my cattle?" "I think someone is," James said carefully. "I cannot prove it is Tully, but the timing is suspicious. He comes here, tries again to buy your land, you refuse. And suddenly your fences are being cut. That is not coincidence." "What do I do?" Sarah asked, hating the helplessness in her voice. "I cannot exactly ride out to confront him, and even if I could, I have no proof." "You do not confront him," James said firmly. "Not alone, and not now. What we do is repair the fence, which I already started, and then I will ride out twice a day to check it. If someone is stealing cattle, We will catch them at it eventually. And in the meantime, I can ride into Willow Creek, talk to the sheriff, let him know what is happening, get it on record so if we do catch someone, there is already a paper trail. The fact that he said we and not you did not escape Sarah's notice. James, you do not have to involve yourself in this. If Tully is behind it, he is a powerful man. He could make trouble for you. He is already making trouble for you, James pointed out, which means he is making trouble for me, because I am not going to stand by and watch someone sabotage you. We are in this together now, Sarah, whether you like it or not. Sarah did like it, far more than was wise, but she tried to keep that off her face. All right, she said, talk to the sheriff, but be careful. I do not want you getting hurt on my account. I am always careful, James said, which Sarah suspected was a lie, but she appreciated the sentiment. He left for town the next morning, and Sarah spent the day fretting, jumping at every sound, until he returned late in the afternoon with news. The sheriff was sympathetic but not especially helpful, James reported. He said without catching someone in the act, there is not much he can do. But he did agree to make a record of the complaint, and he suggested we consider posting the property, putting up signs warning against trespassing. Apparently that makes it easier to prosecute if we do catch someone. Wonderful, Sarah said bitterly. So we just wait and hope they get bold enough to catch? Essentially, yes, James said. But I have another idea. Tonight, I'm going to camp out near the north fence line, the spot where I found the most damage. If someone comes back, I will see them. Maybe get close enough to identify them, or at least chase them off and make it clear the property is being watched. That sounds dangerous, Sarah protested. What if there is more than one person? What if they are armed? I am armed too, James said calmly, and I can take care of myself. Trust me. Sarah, this is the best way to protect your interests. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to forbid him from putting himself at risk, but she had no right to do that, and they both knew it. So, she just nodded, her stomach in knots, and watched him ride out as dusk fell, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake in letting him get involved in her problems. She barely slept that night, straining to hear hoofbeats or gunshots or any sign of trouble, and when James returned at dawn, looking tired but unharmed, she nearly wept with relief. Anything? She asked as he came into the kitchen for coffee. Maybe, he said. I heard riders around midnight, 2 of them, I think, but they stayed well away from where I was camped. Could have been anyone, could have been nothing. I am going to try again tonight, move to a different spot. He did, and the night after that, and the night after that, going without proper sleep to keep watch over her property. Sarah could see the exhaustion gathering in the lines of his face, could see the toll it was taking, and she hated it. Hated that he was suffering because of her. Hated that her problems had become his problems. Hated the whole situation. But she also could not help but be moved by his dedication, by the fact that he was willing to sacrifice his own comfort for her sake. On the 4th night of his vigil, James saw them. He came back at dawn looking grim and triumphant both. It is Tully's men, he said. I got close enough to recognize one of them, a big fellow with a scar on his face. Works for Tully, I have seen him in town. They were cutting the fence and driving 3 of your cattle through when I scared them off. They ran before I could catch them, but I saw them, Sarah. I can identify them. Did they see you? Sarah asked urgently. Probably, James admitted. It was dark, but I had to get close to see who they were, and they definitely knew someone was there. That is going to complicate things. He was right. 2 days later, Sarah and James were in the barn when they heard horses approaching fast. James immediately moved to put himself between Sarah and the door, his hand on his gun, and Sarah felt her heart hammering as 3 men rode into the yard. She recognized Tully immediately, flanked by 2 of his hands, including the scarred man James had described. Cordell! Tully's voice was hard and angry. Get out here. We need to talk. James exchanged a glance with Sarah, then walked out of the barn, his posture relaxed but ready. Sarah followed, despite his warning look, because this was her property and her fight. Mr. Tully, James said calmly, what can I do for you? You can stop sneaking around my land making wild accusations, Tully snapped. I heard you have been telling people I am stealing Mrs. McKenna's cattle. That is slander, Cordell, and I will not stand for it. It is only slander if it is not true, James said evenly. And I saw your man here, he nodded toward the scarred man, cutting Mrs. McKenna's fence 4 nights ago. So, unless you are telling me he was acting without your knowledge, which would make you either a liar or incompetent, I would say the accusation stands." The scarred man bristled, his hand moving toward his gun, but Tully held up a hand to stop him. "You are making a serious mistake, Cordell. You are a stranger here, an interloper. No one is going to take your word over mine. And if you keep causing trouble, you might find that life in this territory becomes very uncomfortable for you." "Is that a threat, Mr. Tully?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "Because if it is, I want to be very clear that Mr. Cordell is acting on my behalf and with my full support. You have been trying to force me off my land since my husband died, and I am done being polite about it. If your men come onto my property again, for any reason, I will have the sheriff arrest them for trespassing and theft. And if you continue to harass me, I will make sure everyone in the territory knows what kind of man you are." Tully's face darkened with anger. "You are playing a dangerous game, Mrs. McKenna. You are in no position to make threats." "Neither are you," James said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "You have been caught. Maybe we cannot prove it in a court of law, not yet. But people will hear about this. Word will spread, and your reputation will suffer just as surely as you intended Mrs. McKenna's to suffer. So, I suggest you back off, leave this lady and her property alone, and count yourself lucky we are not pushing this further." For a long moment, Tully just stared at them, his expression ugly. Then he yanked his horse's head around and spurred away, his men following. Sarah and James stood in the yard watching them go, and Sarah realized she was shaking. "That was terrifying," she said. "That was necessary," James corrected, putting a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Bullies only understand strength, Sarah. You stood up to him, and he backed down. He will think twice before trying anything again. You think he will leave us alone now?" "For a while at least," James said. "Long enough for you to heal and get back on your feet. After that, who knows? But we will deal with it when the time comes." That "we" again. Sarah looked up at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like something from a story, who had stayed when any reasonable person would have left, who had fought for her and protected her and asked for nothing in return. "James," she said softly, "why are you really doing all this? And do not say it is just the right thing to do. There is more to it than that. I can see it in the way you look at this place, the way you talk about the work. You care about this farm. Why?" James was quiet for a long time, his hand still on her shoulder, his eyes distant. "Because it reminds me of home," he said finally. "The ranch I grew up on, the one I sold after my father died. I thought I wanted to be free of it, free of the responsibility and the memories. But I was wrong. I miss it. I miss having a place, having work that matters, having something to care for and protect. And when I saw you that first day, broken and hurting, but so determined not to give up, I saw a chance to have that again. And even if, just for a little while, I saw a chance to matter, so maybe I am not doing this entirely for you, Sarah. Maybe I am doing it for me, too." The honesty of it, the vulnerability, made Sarah's chest tight. "You do matter," she said. "To me, you matter very much. I do not know what I would have done without you these last weeks. Probably lost everything, if I am honest. You saved me, James. You saved this place. I will never be able to repay that." "I am not asking for repayment," James said, and there was something in his eyes now, something warm and intent that made Sarah's breath catch. "Sarah, Whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats again, and they both tensed, but this time it was a familiar face. Doc Hendricks, the physician from Willow Creek, was riding up with his black bag. "Mrs. McKenna," he called, "heard you had taken a serious injury. Thought I should come out and take a look, make sure everything is healing proper." Sarah exchanged a frustrated look with James, the moment broken, but she managed a smile for the doctor. "Thank you, Dr. Hendricks. That is very kind of you." The examination that followed was thorough, and, Sarah was relieved to hear, optimistic. "Whoever set these did a good job," the doctor said, carefully probing the healing bones through the bandages. "Everything seems to be aligned properly. You have got some swelling still, but that is normal." "How is the pain?" "Better," Sarah said honestly. "Mostly just aches now, unless I move wrong." "Good, good. I would say another 2 weeks in the splints. Then we can start removing them and see how the fingers move. You will need to exercise them gently to get the strength and flexibility back. But if all goes well, You should have nearly full use of your hands again. You were very lucky, Mrs. McKenna. I was, Sarah agreed, glancing at James, who was standing by the window, looking uncomfortable with the praise. Very lucky indeed. The doctor left after giving instructions for care and promising to return in 2 weeks, and Sarah and James found themselves alone again. But the moment from earlier was gone. They went back to work, to the familiar routine of farm tasks and meals, and did not speak of what James had almost said. But Sarah thought about it, turned it over in her mind as she lay in bed that night, listening to the distant sounds of James in the barn. He had been about to say something important. She was certain of it, something that might have changed everything between them, and she found herself both disappointed that the moment had been interrupted and terrified of what might have happened if it had not been. Because she was falling in love with him, she could admit that now, at least to herself. Somewhere in the midst of shared meals and quiet evenings and the thousand small intimacies of daily life, she had fallen completely and thoroughly in love with James Cordell. It was foolish and dangerous and doomed to end in heartbreak, because James had never promised forever. He had promised to stay until she healed, and she was healing now, which meant his time here had a limit. Soon, maybe in a matter of weeks, she would be able to manage the farm on her own again. And when that happened, James would have no reason to stay. He would move on, continue his drifting, and Sarah would be alone again, with nothing but memories and a heart that would never quite recover. The thought was unbearable, but she could not see any way around it. She could not ask him to stay, could not make demands on his time and his freedom just because she had been foolish enough to fall in love. All she could do was treasure the time they had left and try to prepare herself for the inevitable goodbye. But James, it seemed, had other ideas. It was evening, 3 weeks after the accident, and Sarah was on the porch attempting to knit, which was going about as well as could be expected, with hands that still could not fully close or grip. James was beside her mending a harness, and the silence between them was comfortable, companionable. Then, out of nowhere, James said, "I have been thinking about something." "What is that?" Sarah asked, not looking up from her mangled knitting. "This farm needs another set of hands permanently, not just until you heal. The work is too much for one person, especially if Tully or someone like him decides to make trouble again. You need a partner, Sarah, someone to share the load." Sarah's heart began to beat faster. "Are you suggesting I hire a hand? Because I already told you I cannot afford—" "I am not talking about a hired hand," James interrupted. "I am talking about a partner, someone with a stake in the place, a reason to stay and work and protect it. Someone like me." Sarah set down her knitting with shaking hands, careful not to drop the needles. "James, what are you saying?" He turned to face her, his expression serious and a little nervous. "I am saying I do not want to leave, Sarah. I am saying these last few weeks, working this farm, living this life, it has felt more like home than anywhere I have been since my parents died. I am saying I care about this place, and more than that, I care about you, a great deal, more than I probably should, given how short a time we have known each other. But the truth is, I think I am falling in love with you, and if there is any chance you might feel the same way, I would like to stay. Not as a hired hand or a good Samaritan, but as your partner, in the farm and in everything else." Sarah stared at him, her mind racing. He was falling in love with her. He wanted to stay. It was everything she had hoped for and been too afraid to imagine, and for a moment she could not speak, could not breathe, could only sit there with tears gathering in her eyes, while James watched her with increasing concern. "Sarah," he said softly, "please say something. If I have misread the situation, if you do not feel the same way, just tell me. I will not make things awkward. I will still stay until you are fully healed. I love you," Sarah blurted out, the words escaping before she could think better of them. "I love you, James. I have been falling in love with you almost since the day you arrived, and I have been terrified because I thought you would leave as soon as I did not need you anymore, and I did not know how I was going to bear it." The smile that spread across James's face was like the sun coming out. "Then I am not leaving," he said firmly, "not unless you want me to." "I do not want you to," Sarah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I want you to stay forever. But James, are you sure? This is a hard life, a lot of work and not much reward. You could do better, go somewhere easier." "I do not want easier," James said. "I want this. I want you. Sarah, I know we have not known each other long, and I know there are practical considerations, but I am asking you to marry me, to let me be your husband and your partner, and to build a life together here. What do you say?" Sarah thought about all the reasons she should be cautious, should wait, should take things slow. She thought about how quickly everything had happened, about what people would say, about the risks of trusting someone so completely. Then she looked at James, at the hope and love in his eyes, at the man who had saved her in every way that mattered, and she knew there was only one answer. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." James whooped, loud and joyful, then seemed to remember himself, and reached for her carefully, mindful of her hands. "Can I kiss you? Is that all right?" "It is more than all right," Sarah said, and then his mouth was on hers, gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Sarah felt like her heart might burst with happiness. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and grinning like fools, James rested his forehead against hers and said, "We are going to have a good life. Sarah McKenna soon to be Cordell. I promise you that." "I believe you," Sarah whispered, and for the first time in a very long time, she felt certain about the future. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Willow Creek, with Doc Hendricks and his wife standing as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, and James wore a new shirt he had purchased in town, and they spoke their vows with hands clasped and eyes shining. The bandages had come off Sarah's hands just the day before, and though her fingers were still stiff and sore, she could grip James's hands well enough to slide the simple gold band onto his finger and receive her own in return. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and James kissed her, Sarah felt a joy so complete it was almost overwhelming. They celebrated with a meal at the town's only restaurant, just the four of them, and Doc Hendricks raised a toast to their happiness and their health. "You two are good for each other," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I have known Mrs. McKenna, well, Mrs. Cordell now, for a few years, and I have never seen her look so happy. And you, young man, you have the look of a man who has found his purpose. May you have many years together, and may the land be generous to you." "Hear, hear," Mrs. Hendricks added, beaming at them both. They returned to the farm in the late afternoon, and James carried Sarah over the threshold, even though she protested that she was perfectly capable of walking. "Tradition," he said, grinning at her. "Besides, I have been wanting to do this since I realized I was in love with you." "You are ridiculous," Sarah said, but she was smiling, and when he set her down inside the house that was now truly theirs, she pulled him into a kiss that quickly grew heated. They had been careful before, conscious of propriety and the need to wait, but they were married now, and there was no need for restraint. James led her to the bedroom, his hands careful on her healing fingers, and they came together with a tenderness and passion that left Sarah breathless and amazed. This was her husband, her partner, her love, and the rightness of it settled into her bones like it had always been meant to be this way. Afterwards, lying tangled together in the fading light, Sarah traced the lines of James's face with her fingertips, still marveling at the turn her life had taken. "What are you thinking?" James asked softly, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I am thinking that a month ago I was alone and broken and convinced my life was over," Sarah said honestly. "And now I am married to a man I love more than I thought possible, and I have hope again. It feels like a dream." "It is not a dream," James said firmly. "This is real, Sarah. We are real, and we are going to build something beautiful here, together. You will see." He was right. The months that followed were hard work, but they were also the happiest of Sarah's life. With two of them working the farm, tasks that had seemed insurmountable became manageable. They harvested the hay and oats, sold the crop for a decent profit, and used the money to buy more cattle and make improvements to the property. James built an addition onto the barn, repaired the roof on the house, and installed a proper pump in the kitchen so Sarah did not have to haul water from the well. Sarah's hands healed slowly but surely, until she could once again handle all the tasks she had before, though they were sometimes sore by the end of a long day. They weathered a bad storm in August that nearly destroyed the new hay crop, but they managed to save most of it. They dealt with a difficult calving season in the fall, losing 2 calves but saving the mothers. They hosted their first Thanksgiving together, just the two of them, and Sarah cooked a chicken since they did not have a turkey, and James pronounced it the best meal he had ever eaten. They spent Christmas snowed in, a blizzard raging outside while they stayed warm by the fire, and James gave Sarah a set of leather work gloves he had made himself, perfectly fitted to her hands, and she gave him a quilt she had sewn, the stitches still a little uneven because her fingers did not have their full dexterity back yet, but he treasured it anyway. Marcus Tully made no more trouble. After the confrontation in the yard, he seemed to accept that Sarah was not going to be driven away, and his attention turned to other pursuits. They saw him in town occasionally, and he was always coldly polite, but he left them alone, which was all they asked. In the spring, Sarah realized she was pregnant. She told James over breakfast, nervous despite herself because they had not talked much about children, had been too focused on surviving and building their life together. But James's face lit up like she had given him the greatest gift imaginable, and he pulled her into his arms and held her tight, his voice thick with emotion when he said, "We are going to have a baby. Sarah, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, needing to hear it. "I am happier than I have ever been in my life," James said honestly. "Scared out of my mind, but so happy I could burst. We are going to be parents. God, Sarah, we are going to have a family." The pregnancy was not easy. Sarah was sick most of the first 3 months, and as she grew larger, the work became harder. But James was endlessly patient and supportive, taking on extra tasks without complaint, bringing her water and crackers when she could not keep anything else down, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings. He worried constantly about her health and the baby's health and whether they would be good parents, and Sarah loved him even more for the worrying, for caring so much. Their son was born on a cold November morning in 1878, 16 months after Sarah had broken her hands and changed both their lives forever. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Doc Hendricks and his wife, and there were moments when Sarah thought she might not survive it, but she did, and when she heard her baby's first cry, when Doc Hendricks placed the squirming, red-faced infant in her arms, she felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it eclipsed everything that had come before. James was beside her, tears streaming down his face, his hand gentle on the baby's downy head, and he whispered, "He is perfect, Sarah, he is perfect." They named him Thomas after Sarah's first husband because she wanted her son to carry something of the man who had brought her to this place and made her life here possible. James agreed without hesitation, secure enough in himself and their love to honor the past without being threatened by it. Little Thomas was a healthy baby, loud and hungry and endlessly curious, and he transformed their lives in ways both exhausting and wonderful. 2 years later, they had a daughter, born on a bright spring morning with far less drama than her brother. They named her Catherine, after James's mother, and she was a sweet, quiet baby who seemed to observe the world with solemn eyes. James doted on both children, proving to be a warm and devoted father, and Sarah often found herself pausing in her work to watch him with them. Thomas perched on his shoulders while he did chores, or Catherine cradled in his arms while he read aloud in the evenings, and feeling grateful beyond measure for the family they had built. The farm prospered under their joint management. They expanded gradually, buying adjoining land when it became available, increasing their herd, planting a larger garden, adding fruit trees, and a proper chicken coop. It was never easy, farming never was, but they were good at it, good at working together and supporting each other through the hard times. They had more children over the years, 2 more sons and another daughter, until their table was full and loud with the chaos and joy of a large family. The original homestead house grew with them, James adding rooms as needed, until it was a sprawling, comfortable home filled with love and laughter. Sarah's hands never fully recovered. There was always a little stiffness, a little ache on cold days, a slight weakness in her right hand that meant she could not grip as tightly as she once could. But it did not stop her from living a full and active life, from working alongside James every day, from raising their children and managing the endless tasks of a working farm. The scars, both physical and emotional, became just another part of her story, a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had survived. James never regretted his decision to stay. He told Sarah that often, usually late at night when the children were asleep, and they had a few precious moments alone. "You gave me back my life," he would say. "You gave me purpose and family and a home. Everything good I have is because of you." "We gave it to each other," Sarah would always correct him, because it was true. They had saved each other in all the ways that mattered and built something lasting and beautiful from the wreckage of their separate pasts. On their 20th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over land that had tested them and sustained them and become as much a part of them as their own heartbeats. Their oldest son was 21 now, a man grown and talking about starting his own homestead. Their youngest daughter was just 10, still a child, but growing fast. The others ranged in between, a house full of noise and energy and endless demands on their time and attention. It was exhausting. It was wonderful. It was everything Sarah had never dared to hope for during those dark days after Thomas's death, when she thought her life was over. "Do you ever regret it?" Sarah asked, slipping her hand into James's. "Giving up your freedom to settle down here with me?" James turned to look at her, his face weathered by 2 decades of sun and wind, but his eyes still as warm and full of love as they had been the day he asked her to marry him. "Not for a single moment," he said firmly. "This is exactly where I am meant to be. With you, with our children, on this land. This is my home, Sarah. You are my home. You always will be." Sarah smiled, leaning into his solid warmth, and felt that familiar swell of gratitude and love that had never diminished in all their years together. "I love you," she said, simple and true. "I love you too," James replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "For the rest of my life, and beyond, I love you." They stood there as the light faded, 2 people who had found each other at exactly the right moment, who had chosen each other every day since, who had built a life of meaning and purpose from determination and hard work and an abundance of love. Behind them, their children's voices drifted out from the house, calling them in for supper, and together, hand in hand, they turned toward home and family and all the beautiful ordinary moments that made up a life well lived. The years continued to flow by like the creek that watered their land, steady and sure. Thomas, their eldest, did eventually start his own homestead 10 miles south with a young woman from Willow Creek named Anna. They visited often, bringing grandchildren who filled Sarah and James's home with new life and laughter. Catherine married a school teacher and moved to the growing town of Billings, but came home every summer with her family. The other children made their own paths, some staying in farming, others pursuing different dreams, but all of them carrying with them the lessons their parents had taught them about hard work, integrity, and the importance of family. James and Sarah grew old together, their bodies wearing down from decades of labor, but their love only deepening with time. They celebrated their 30th anniversary, then their 40th, each milestone a testament to the strength of what they had built together. They became fixtures in the community, respected and well-liked, known for their generosity and their willingness to help neighbors in need, just as James had once helped Sarah. When James was 68 and Sarah 65, he became ill with a fever that turned into pneumonia. Doc Hendricks was long dead by then, replaced by his son, but the younger doctor. Hendricks did everything he could. For a week, Sarah sat by James's bedside, holding his hand, reading to him, reminding him of their life together and all the reasons he needed to fight. Their children came, gathering around their father, but it was Sarah he focused on, Sarah whose hand he held, Sarah whose face was the last thing he saw with clarity before the fever took him. "I have loved you every day," he whispered to her the night before he died, his voice thin but certain. "Every single day, Sarah. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." "You saved my life," Sarah said through tears. "In every way a person can be saved. I would not have survived without you. I would not have lived. Thank you, James. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me." "Always," James whispered. "Always, my Sarah." He died quietly just before dawn, Sarah's hand in his, and she felt the moment his soul left his body like a physical blow. The grief was immense, overwhelming, a tidal wave that threatened to drown her. But her children were there to hold her up, to help her through, just as she and James had taught them to do for each other. They buried him on a hill overlooking the farm, the land he had loved and worked and made his own. And Sarah visited his grave every day, talking to him about the weather and the crops and the grandchildren and great-grandchildren who were his legacy. She lived another 12 years without him, years that were simultaneously too long and too short. She missed him every day with an ache that never fully faded, but she also felt his presence everywhere, in the house they had built together, in the land they had tended, in the faces of their descendants. She was not alone, surrounded as she was by family, but there was a loneliness that came from being the only one left who remembered the beginning, who had been there the day a dusty cowboy rode into her yard and changed everything. When Sarah died in her sleep at age 77, peacefully and without pain, their children buried her next to James on the hill. They placed a single headstone for both of them, carved with their names and the dates of their lives, and a simple inscription that said, "Together in life, together forever." The farm stayed in the family, passed down through the generations, each one adding to it and caring for it and keeping alive the story of Sarah and James, the woman with broken hands and the cowboy who refused to leave her side. It became a family legend, told and retold, a reminder of the power of kindness and courage and love that chooses to stay when it would be easier to go. And on summer evenings, when the light slanted gold across the fields and the mountains turned purple in the distance, people said you could sometimes see two figures standing on the hill where the gravestones were, hand in hand, looking out over the land they had built together, still watching over the home and family they had created, from nothing but determination and an abundance of love. Whether it was true or just a romantic story, no one could say for certain. But the land remained, and the love remained, and the legacy of Sarah and James Cordell endured, proof that sometimes the most broken things can be made whole again, and that the help that arrives at exactly the right moment can change not just a day or a season, but the course of an entire life. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the land a century later, still told the story, still looked at the old house that had been preserved and expanded, and turned into a family museum of sorts, filled with artifacts from that first generation. Sarah's wedding dress was there, carefully preserved, James's first saddle, the leather gloves he had made her that first Christmas, the quilt with uneven stitches, pictures and letters and records that painted a picture of two people who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and built something that lasted. And in the old barn, on a beam near the door, someone long ago had carved two sets of initials inside a heart, S, C, and JC, intertwined forever. No one knew exactly when it had been done or who had done it, though family legend said it was James himself, carving it in secret during those early years when he was still amazed at his good fortune in finding Sarah. It had been worn smooth by time and countless hands touching it for luck, but it was still there, still visible, still a testament to a love that had started with an accident and a stranger's kindness and had grown into something eternal. The story of Sarah and James Cordell became more than just a family tale. It was written down eventually, published in a local history book about Montana Territory, taught in schools as an example of pioneer resilience and the settlement of the West. But the academic version could never quite capture the truth of it, the reality of two broken people finding wholeness in each other, the quiet daily courage it took to build a life from nothing, the depth of a love that sustained them through decades of hardship and joy alike. What mattered, what endured, was not the historical record, but the living legacy. The land still producing crops and supporting cattle, the house still standing strong against Montana winters, the descendants still gathering there for holidays and reunions, still feeling the presence of those two original souls who had started it all, the story still being told to children, teaching them about courage and love and the importance of helping those in need. And maybe, just maybe, on certain summer evenings when the light was just right, two figures really did stand on that hill, watching over the land they had loved, hands clasped together, still refusing to leave each other's side. Even death itself had tried to separate them. Because some loves are strong enough to transcend time and mortality. Some bonds are forged so deeply that they become part of the very soil and stone and sky. And some stories, the true ones, the ones built on sacrifice and choice and unwavering commitment, those stories never really end at all. They just go on, passed down through generations, changing lives and inspiring hearts, proving over and over again that when someone is broken, when everything seems lost, sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stop, to stay, to bind up the wounds and refuse to leave until healing comes. Sometimes all it takes is love. And that, in the end, was the real legacy of Sarah and James Cordell. Not the land, not the wealth, not even the family, as important as those things were. The true legacy was the lesson they taught simply by living their lives, that love is a choice made every day, that healing takes time and patience, that family is built through commitment and care, and that sometimes the greatest fortune comes not from what we seek, but from what finds us when we are at our most broken. The farm still stood, More than a century after a wagon wheel crushed Sarah's hands and a dusty cowboy named James rode into her life. It stood as testament and memorial and living proof that from the most desperate circumstances can come the most beautiful outcomes. That broken things can be mended, that strangers can become family, that love, real and true and committed, can overcome any obstacle and endure any test. And somewhere, whether in memory or reality, or in that mysterious space where the two merge, Sarah and James still stood together on their hill, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and purple, their hands clasped tight, their hearts full, their love eternal, still together, still home, still proof that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a simple choice to stop and help, to stay when you could go, to love when fear would be easier. Their story was finished, but it was not over. It lived on in every act of kindness, every choice to stay and fight rather than flee, every moment when someone reached out to help another person in need. It lived on in the land and the family and the memories. It lived on in the hearts of everyone who heard it and was inspired to be better, to love more deeply, to refuse to give up even when everything seems lost. And that, perhaps, is the best ending any story can have. Not an ending at all, but a beginning that keeps unfolding, generation after generation, life after life, proving that love and courage and simple human kindness are the forces that really shape the world. The story of Sarah and James Cordell was one small story in the vast history of the American West, but it was a true one, and it mattered, and it would go on mattering as long as there were people who needed to hear that they are not alone. That help can come when least expected, and that broken things, given time and love and care, can heal and become even stronger than they were before. The sun set over the Montana prairie, painting the sky in shades of glory, and the land that Sarah and James had built together rested easy under the stars, their love a permanent part of its foundation, their story a gift to all who came after. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the grass, you might hear it still, the sound of two hearts beating as one, the echo of vows spoken and kept, the promise that some loves never die but live on forever in the places they called home and the lives they touched. This was their story. This was their legacy. This was love that refused to quit, that bound up broken hands and broken hearts and made them whole again. And it was a story that deserved to be remembered and told and celebrated, because in a world full of hardship and struggle, it stood as proof that goodness exists, that help comes, that love wins in the end, always.